Hello, and welcome to your 2022 Bank Secrecy Act and Anti-Money Laundering training, brought to you as a value of affiliation from the League of Southeastern Credit Unions. In today's presentation, we'll have three main goals. The first, to identify our regulators' expectations for our credit union and our staff. We'll then review the 5 pillars of BSA compliance. And then we'll take a look at a few credit union case studies who have failed BSA compliance to see what lessons we can take away. Starting off with the 3 most basic themes of BSA compliance, the first is analyzing and managing our risk to understand that every credit union's risk level will be different based on their field of membership, products and services, and a variety of other factors. The second piece is knowing our members, which we are already super proud of from a relationship banking perspective, but can also help us with BSA concerns as well. And then our documentation, our required paper trail that is made up of CTRs and SARs, which we will review as well. So the purpose of the Bank Secrecy Act was designed to identify the source, volume, and movement of currency across the United States and into financial institutions, as well as creating that record-keeping obligation to create the paper trail. And money laundering can be nicely defined by this chart here, starting off in the top left with the collection of dirty money. Dirty money is defined as any money coming from an illegal source. So no matter what crazy criminal creative way they may use, they then want to place that money into the financial system. So they'll use a variety of layering techniques, which you can see a few examples of across this globe here, including wire transfers, offshore bank accounts, loans from a fake company, or payment of a false invoice, but also smaller items such as structuring and even microstructuring of transactions to avoid reporting requirements. If they are able to successfully integrate those funds into the financial system through your financial institution, that's when they make it over to the bottom left of this chart, where they can then go use those funds to buy real tangible assets of whatever they choose, which is exactly what we are trying to avoid through BSA and AML. And so many different areas and organizations also touch these items. So this chart at the bottom explains that flow, starting off in the left with FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network of the US Treasury Department. They are the ones that create the laws and then decide that we need to follow those laws as financial institutions. In the middle, we have credit unions. We discuss the front line a lot in credit union land, but in this case, we are the front line in preventing money laundering, which is why we need to be compliant and are seen in the experts in this area. We then have the NCOA, or your state regulating body that enforces compliance via your annual examinations. And then finally, we make it over to the right side where we have federal law enforcement, who is able to use this data for analysis and prosecution when necessary. As a reminder, this is a required annual training clarified in the FinCEN advisory you see below. And this advisory also mentions a poor culture of compliance existing due to a lack of leadership when it comes to BSA. So what exactly is a culture of compliance? Luckily, they've provided us some clarification around that in this letter. So to touch on a few of them, compliance should not be compromised by revenue interests. We'll take a look at a case study when we get towards the end to see that in action. Leadership providing adequate resources, both human and technological resources, really just the time to be able to provide and fill out these reports. Tested by a third party, which is our audit we'll discuss, and then an understanding of how these reports are used. So if you are interested in that last item there, be sure to be on the lookout for our compliance department's BSA workshop for more detailed information there. The BSA exam manual also states that the board of directors and senior management should be informed of changes and new developments in the BSA, as well as the ramifications of non-compliance and the risks that this will pose your credit union. Pretty much it is every area of risk, from financial to regulatory to reputation. However, luckily there are very few changes and new developments to BSA, which makes that part pretty easy for us to satisfy. Next, looking at Regulation 748.2 for our required minimums when it comes to policy making for our credit union under BSA. Your bare minimum you will see in the red text here, which states that your credit union's BSA compliance program must be written down, which would be the form of a policy. That policy then approved by the credit union's board, and then BSA activity always reflected in the credit union's minutes. The second piece of that is our member identification program, which we will get to as we continue on. Which then brings us to our next section, which are the 5 pillars of BSA compliance. And if we have these items incorporated into our BSA program, we have appropriate safeguards. And the first of those pillars of compliance is internal controls. And understanding that the board of directors, acting through your senior management team, are the ones who are ultimately responsible for ensuring that your credit union has an effective internal control structure. Our internal control structure should always be in line with the level of the size of our credit union, the structure, risks, and our complexity. So some common examples of internal controls that we see in credit unions include providing dual controls to the best extent possible. This typically means that the employee who's maybe taking the transaction should not also be responsible for decisioning to file the reports. Also providing sufficient controls and monitoring systems to help you detect when something may be suspicious or out of pattern, as well as identifying those high-risk areas that we'll discuss on our risk assessment. Also ensuring adequate supervision of employees that handle currency, as well as incorporating BSA compliance into job descriptions and initial training as well. Also a reminder that you have Policy Pro if you need any assistance with your BSA policy. Policy Pro is another great value of affiliation, and please reach out to any member of our team if you need assistance accessing these resources. Pillar number 2 is training. So at a minimum, the credit union's training program must involve employees whose duties involve BSA and tailored to the person's specific responsibilities, along with a new staff training during orientation. As always, your BSA officer should also receive periodic training and ensure that they are up to date on any regulatory requirements. You should also provide documentation of your BSA training program. So if you are needing certificates showing your attendance from today's training, please reach out to your member engagement consultant and we'd be happy to provide those for you. Pillar number 3 is an audit. An audit of your program is recommended every 12 to 18 months. And this independent testing should at a minimum include each of these bullets you see on the slide here, including a review of your policies, procedures, and processes, review of your risk assessment and any transaction-based testing you may have. If you've had any BSA issues in the past, ensuring that you have completed your efforts to resolve those violations, as well as ensuring your staff training is complete and any monitoring systems you may have at your credit union. As always, LSCU's Credit Union Audit and Compliance Group is available for BSA audits. If you are interested, please reach out to your auditor or your leverage business development consultant. Pillar number 4 is ensuring that you have a BSA officer on staff. While the board of directors is responsible for designating this individual, it is important that they also have the sufficient authority and resources to administer an effective BSA program based on your credit union's risk. The BSA officer should also ensure that they are making the regular, as in monthly, reports to the board of any ongoing or reoccurring BSA activity. Also ensure that your BSA officer is fully knowledgeable of all BSA regulations, as well as how they apply to all credit union products and services. So we mentioned risk assessment. So just to touch a little bit deeper on our risk assessment, this is made up of a two-step process, starting out with identifying our categories of risk. These categories can be broken down into things such as products and services. Also on members, in red there, you see MSBs, which stand for money service businesses. When we get to the case studies, we can see how money service businesses specifically have affected a few credit unions. And our last criteria is also geography, which FinCEN classifies areas under high intensity drug trafficking and high intensity financial crime areas. Once we've taken some time to identify our areas of risk, we can then move to step 2 to analyze our risk categories and determine patterns that we see using data available to us. You can see some examples of some of these questions, including what is the purpose of this account and what type of activity do we expect to see through this account? Also with location, many times credit unions have plenty safeguards around this item, but also consider products and services used by that member. After we analyze in step 2, we can then move down to risk mitigation and monitoring through any reports we're able to run manually through our core, including inactive or large deposit reports, and monitoring with any technology we may have, including Verifin or Yellowhammer. And here is an example of a simple risk matrix moving from low risk to high risk. At the top on the left, we see that a stable membership base is considered at a lot lower risk level than as we move across to opening up into maybe a new county or new area without that historical relationship. And also e-services as you move down to the next line. As always, it's not right or wrong to be in any area, but the most important thing is that you understand as a credit union where you fall and what you can do to mitigate those risks. Once we've completed our risk assessment, we can then use the data we collect to develop our BSA program with written policies and procedures tailored to our credit union. We should always include monitoring high-risk products, services, members, or branches, and identify any actions taken to mitigate those risks, as well as ensuring that we are evolving our risk assessment as any major changes happen to our credit union, such as mergers, growth in field of membership, or changes in products and services. Without any new changes, it is recommended to review your BSA risk assessment once every 12 to 18 months on the same timeline as your BSA audit. Here is a map of those high intensity drug trafficking areas in Alabama, Georgia, and the panhandle of Florida. And then we have the rest of Florida that you see here. So again, these are the high intensity drug trafficking counties as defined by FinCEN. And then this map is for our high intensity financial crime areas. The highlighted areas that are not in blue are what we classify as those areas. And if you have a high concentration of members or a location in any of these areas, it is important that these items are included in your credit union's risk assessment. Which then brings us to the member identification program. The purpose of this program is to enable us to form a reasonable belief that we know the identify of the members that we are conducting business with. So in order to complete this, it is a two-step process, starting with collecting our identifying info. And those pieces of information across the board are name, date of birth, address, and we always must have a physical address, as well as our tax ID or social security number. And we also have to have verifying information. So it is not quite enough for the member to provide this information over the phone or fill it out on an application. We must always move down into step 2 and collect our verifying info as well. So 99% of the time, you're going to use the top option for verifying info, which is our documentary method. And that is simply a government issued ID that has a photo and is unexpired. So driver's license, passport, military ID, all of these items suffice as long as they are unexpired and have a photo. We also have the non-documentary method, which can also be a great method if you have any questions or concerns, but be wary about using it on its own unless your credit union allows that via policy. That would be information that comes from a trusted third-party source, including credit bureaus, tax returns, and other online verification systems. With our member identification program, we should always have a procedure explaining when the credit union should open an account and what access members will have until verification. All of this information should be kept for 5 years after the account is closed, with a full description or photocopy of the documents used to open that account. We also must include the cross-reference with the federal terrorist list through OFAC and provide notice to our applicants that we are requesting this info. We then have our definition of an account, which is everything that we know it to be, such as transaction, asset, credit, or extension of credit accounts, as well as deposit accounts. All of these things are when we have to collect these pieces of information. So you just know for everybody, name, birth date, address, social, and verifying info, except for these teeny tiny caveats at the bottom that most of the time you will never have to worry about. So then our 2 reports. Our first report is a currency transaction report, or a CTR. We are required to file these for each transaction in currency, as in cash, of more than $10,000. Additionally, multiple transactions in cash totaling more than $10,000 during any one business day are treated as a single transaction if they are by or on behalf of the same person. Additionally, you also aggregate your weekends, ATM, and night deposit transactions together and file these reports within 15 calendar days after the date of the transaction. So no matter how many separate transactions, if they are in cash, they count towards this threshold. And once you are over $10,000 and 1 penny or more, you're required to file a CTR anytime you have more in currency than $10,000. Both of these reports are filed electronically and a 5-year record retention. And again, currency is defined as coin and paper money, and also avoids aggregate transactions such as maybe placing those funds towards a loan payment, purchase of a CD, monetary instruments, or coming in through currency exchange or shared branching networks. We also ensure that we do not offset deposits and withdrawals in these totals. And again, cash only for currency transaction reports. On the other hand, we have our suspicious activity reports. You will see those abbreviated as a SAR. And we are required to file these anytime we have a criminal violation involving insider abuse of any amount, $5,000 or more with the suspect identified, $25,000 or more with an unknown suspect, or the majority of our SAR reporting comes from the bottom half of the slide, where we see $5,000 or more when the credit union suspects this may involve potential money laundering, which we defined at the top, or other illegal activity, which is pretty expansive, is designed to evade the BSA. That is where structuring comes into place and trying to stay underneath the $10,000 CTR threshold. And also the last one in bold, no business or apparent lawful purpose, not the type of transaction the member is expected to engage in, and the credit union cannot come up with a reasonable explanation for the transaction. And that is where our knowing our members piece comes into play. So we also file these reports electronically, but we have a little bit longer. For SAR reporting, we have no later than 30 calendar days from the detection of facts, which is after a meaningful investigation. So whenever you have the detection of facts, whenever the light bulb, that's something that may not be right with this transaction, that is when it's time to start conducting that investigation. If for some reason you're unable to identify a suspect, that timeline is extended to 60 days. And they ask that you re-report on continuing suspicious activity after 90 days. Again, a 5-year record retention for these reports, and always ensure that your board is notified on a monthly basis of all of your SAR filings. However, SARs are completely confidential and ensure that the only information shared is really that you have had a SAR. Unauthorized disclosure of a SAR is a violation of federal law, especially when it comes to a suspect member. So ensure that we are really following these guidelines here. And we also have a federal law providing safe harbor for SAR filing as well. This is also a nice SAR checklist to ensure that you are following all the steps and meeting the timelines in the SAR. Is a great thing to reference back at your credit union throughout the year. A few red flags for suspicious activity. If you have a member who is using an ID or suspicious documents for identification that you've never seen before, that is definitely a red flag. As well as a member trying to persuade an employee to not file a report. Structuring can come into play when we see many transactions sent through in a short amount of time with large round dollar amounts, as well as frequent international wire transfers from our 2 higher risk locations. We can also have a red flag if we have members making frequent or large transactions without a record of past or present employment experience, and many transactions coming in and immediately going right back out. Again, structuring, making sure that we can catch when a member may be separating cash transactions to stay under the over $10,000 CTR reporting threshold, as well as members structuring through multiple branches or by groups of people who enter a single branch at the same time. There are a few more that you see here, but I would like to highlight that your frontline staff knows your members better than anyone else and are your best protection in recognizing these red flags as they occur. Credit unions are also required to maintain record of monetary instruments, including traveler's checks, cashier's checks, money orders, and credit union checks sold between $3,000 and $10,000 in currency. For member sales, we verify their membership and record their identifying info. Our record should include their name, date, type, serial number, amount, and their information. And if your credit union allows sale to non-members, additional information is required as well. Just like our CTRs, we record multiple purchases during one business day, including different types treated as one purchase when they are totaling $3,000 or more. And we also have to follow the wire transfer rule when it comes to $3,000 or more. As a reminder, this does not cover ACH or electronic materials and a 5-year record retention. The beneficial owners rule is recommended for credit unions to develop a policy even if you do not serve business accounts. This is ensuring that you have written procedures to identify and verify legal entity members. But this does not involve financial institutions, federal or state government, or publicly traded companies. Beneficial owners are defined at the bottom here, including those who own 25% or more in a legal entity, those in control of a legal entity, such as CEO, CFO, or president, and trusts that own 25% or more of an entity as well. This update went into compliance in May of 2018. Again, a 5-year record retention, and we have to make sure that we keep all of these documents as well to ensure that we are getting the identifying info for anybody in position of power in the businesses defined as beneficial owners. That then brings us to Section 314A of the Patriot Act. While we discussed that SAR and FinCEN reporting is completely confidential, we must ensure that we check our 314A reports for law enforcement sharing requests. We must have a policy and procedure for these requests, and we also must ensure that we have a contact to receive these requests. If we do have a match, we perform the items you see in step 3, including reviewing their current account, any active account within the previous 12 months, and transactions within 6 months. We would then have 14 days to report these matches. You are only required to report a positive match. And we always make sure that we keep a copy of our response back as well, as 95% of these requests contribute to an arrest or an indictment. Additionally, there is the voluntary information sharing, which comes from Section 314B for financial institutions to share information between each other. If you have any questions about 314B, make sure that you take a look at that to see what guidelines you need to have to initiate one of these requests. We also have OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Asset Control. OFAC is responsible for enforcing sanctions on people, nations, and entities. The application this has for credit unions is that credit unions must regularly review the specially designated national list against your membership and run applicants through OFAC prior to account opening, as well as wire, ACH, EFT, loan payments, and other items as well. Additionally, you must block or reject any entities on these lists and report those transactions to OFAC within 10 business days. If your credit union is a holder of blocked property, you also need to report annually by September 30th with your information as of June 30th. We also must perform a risk assessment when it comes to international fund transfers, non-resident accounts, and also additional member accounts. However, your OFAC pillars of compliance are essentially the same as BSA when it comes to knowing your members, ensuring that you have the time and availability to run these reports and ensure that they are completed within the timeline. We also have member due diligence and ensuring that we have an ongoing process of learning more about our members that is tailored to your credit union's risk profile. Following our developed policies and chain of command for these items, we also must establish a level of member risk. Most of the time, the majority of our members fall into a low risk category, which is just important to make sure we have regularly updated contact info. And if we are able to classify a member as high risk, ensure that we dedicate the time to review these accounts and use some of our sources to answer some of the questions we see here, such as the source of their funds, occupation, place of employment, etc. Always make sure that when it comes to due diligence, we keep thorough documentation and analysis. Which then brings us to our case studies. Our first case study covers North Dade Community Development Federal Credit Union. They were a small $4 million credit union in North Miami-Dade County, Florida, with 5 employees. In the year 2013, looking at their MSB transactions, which made up 90% of this credit union's revenue, included over $1 billion in outgoing wires, $5.3 million in return checks, and over $984 million in remote deposit capture. In turn, the NCUA ordered a cease and desist of this credit union in 2013. So to look and see at their BSA actions in the same order of our pillars of compliance that we've reviewed today, under internal controls, they did not assess their money laundering risk, nor did they perform a risk assessment for almost 4 years. They also had inadequate controls for their level of third-party vendor relationships and had over 56 of those money service business accounts. For over 3 years, one individual accounted for 60% of the credit union's entire business portfolio, while filing over 2,000 CTRs without placing the credit union as a high-risk status. Additionally, the credit union did not designate a BSA officer, nor did they conduct annual training for their employees or have any evidence of a BSA audit. Additionally, North Dade did not identify any of their accounts as business accounts or even money service business accounts, and only filed 15 SARs in a 3-year period, which even with the previous number of CTRs just on the one account is incredibly low, but especially even after a seizure of over $1 million from an MSB that was one of their members. Additionally, the law enforcement sharing list through the Patriot Act, Section 314A, they failed to review those lists for over 2 years, which resulted in a FinCEN fine of $300,000 and liquidation. And for our second case study, we have Bethex Federal Credit Union, which was a larger credit union headquartered in New York. They had your typical financial review until 2011, when this credit union began servicing those money service businesses again, including activities in high-risk areas without updating their internal controls. So for this credit union in 2010, they were doing just over $650 million in transactions, while 2 years later, they had moved to international and grown to over $4 billion, an increase of more than 300% without modifying any of its controls. This decision was made because they were able to generate high fee income while also failing to conduct a risk assessment while doing business in over 30 countries, failing to perform their own due diligence and relying on only vendor without oversight, and were also unable to monitor suspicious activities with their level of staffing. For this credit union's BSA officer, they continued to go around the BSA officer and send multiple wires under the policy threshold. They also ignored auditor findings and had inadequate training for their credit union. As a result, they were fined $500,000 and liquidated as well. So the lessons that we're able to learn from these FinCEN enforcement actions include ensuring that for our internal controls, we always have oversight of our vendors and our vendor management. Also ensuring that we are not wiring money abroad or servicing money service businesses without conducting research to ensure that the risk does not outweigh the reward. But also once a year to ensure that you have updated controls, especially when introducing any new products, services, or changing anything with the makeup of the credit union. Continue to hire amazing staff and make sure that you keep your BSA officer up to date, as well as the rest of your employees and board with annual training. And always make sure you take any recommendations that may come from your audit. As a reminder, you can see the variety of the compliance resources and tools offered through the League of Southeastern Credit Unions and Affiliates Compliance Department. You can see a variety of these available on our website as well. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I also wanted to remind you to continue to engage with LSCU. Ensure that if you are not signed up to log into our website or receive our emails, that you do so at lscu.coop, and make sure that you check out the variety of free values that we provide, as well as connecting with your LSCU liaison and business development consultants. Thank you for your time and your completion of your 2022 Bank Secrecy Act training. If you have any questions, please make sure to reach out to your member engagement consultant. Thank you.